Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud.
Hi team, I'm Ed Hassan. On today's episode of the Sumud podcast, we uplift, empower, and amplify Andy Shallal, the visionary owner and founder of Busboys and Poets. Andy is a quintessential Renaissance man, multidisciplinary entrepreneur, and a committed activist whose work transcends the boundary of art, culture, and community engagement. I first met Andy about a month ago when I was invited to be on a panel at Busboys and Poets for the Actor series. Actor stands for a continuing talk on race. The theme was Black solidarity and the Palestinian liberation movement. Mark Harrison and Bill Fletcher were my co-panelists, and a special thank you to Pamela Pinnock for organizing that event and for helping me get Andy on the podcast. Andy, thank you for being a guest today.
It's my pleasure, Ed. Thank you.
So just for the audience who's going to watch us, you want to let them know what location you're at?
I'm at the 14 and B location, which is our original location. I'm in the back office at this moment. So this is the one we opened in 2005.
Amazing. That was the first one.
Yes.
Okay. So I just, before I jump into questions, I just want to let the audience know, when I was on that panel, one of the audience members asked a question that I felt was reductive, and my co-panelists knew that I was getting a little bit upset at the question. And then all of a sudden, remember, this is bright lights. I don't know if anybody's been there on the panel, but it's bright lights. You can't really see anything in the audience. However, this large, tall, angelic, bald gentleman, I could just see your face a little bit. You spoke so eloquently and you dropped a lot of knowledge, and you really helped me out there. And I was asking myself, because I didn't know who you were at the time, I was asking myself, why is this guy not on the panel with me? What's going on here? It took me about 2 weeks to realize that you were the owner of Busboys and Poets. So thank you, Andy.
Of course.
Yeah. So why don't you, if you're okay with it, kind of give me a little bit information on your background. I know you moved from Iraq in the 60s. Is that correct?
That's right.
And why did you decide to move from Iraq to the U.S.?
Well, I had no choice. I was a small child back then, and my father had accepted a position with the Arab League. The Arab League was a pan-Arab movement that brought Arab countries together, almost like a United Nations for Arab countries. And it was stationed in Cairo. Nasser, who was the president of Egypt at that point, was kind of the center of gravity for all of that. My father happened to have just left working in government in Iraq. There was a lot of changes that were happening there. The Ba'ath were coming in and so on. My father was kind of between jobs, so to speak, and happened to be vacationing in Lebanon. And we ended up meeting somebody there who ended up then offering him a position to be the representative for the Arab League in Washington, D.C. And he accepted it.
Got it. And so how old were you roughly when you got to the U.S.?
I was 10.
10.
I was 10. It was 1966. Yep. Can I, 1 second, please, if you don't mind?
Yeah, please.
Sorry about that. No problem. Is this going to be a problem?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
No. We can cut out. Don't worry about it.
Well, good. I apologize.
No. It's all. I actually prefer this, to be honest with you, because it gives a real life essence of your world and how things are.
The day-to-day operational stuff. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, we're back on.
You're back on. So you moved here when you said at a young age.
Yeah, at a young age of 10, and it was 1966, and my brother, my sister, and my parents moved here. We lived in Arlington, Virginia. We lived in D.C. first for a short time. Then we moved to Arlington, and we stayed in Arlington for quite some time, and then moved to other sections of Northern Virginia, and then back to D.C.
So can you describe the feelings initially when you got to this area?
Well, I mean, it's very strange coming from the Middle East, not speaking English and being, different. At that time, just felt very odd. This is a country that was very strange to me. The only thing I knew about the United States was through Hollywood. Cowboys and Indians were the thing then, and so you come here as a child to start looking around, trying to figure out what is going on. And I know one of the first things that struck me was how this country deals with something called race, which I really wasn't familiar with in Iraq. And so, kind of being in the middle of that, especially back then, if you recall, in 1966, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, there was a riots that happened. Of course, DC was a center for much of that, and so we lived right outside of DC at that time. And I remember looking outside of our balcony from the apartment we were in, and I could see smoke rising in the distance. So, being a child coming from Iraq, we've seen that before. I we probably had like three different uprisings in Iraq during the time that I was a child growing up there. So it wasn't scary or anything like that. It was just, another revolution, as we call them. And honestly, I mean, not much. I was kind of surprised. Schools were closed. Which sometimes when we have revolutions in Iraq, the schools don't close. It's like, okay, let's keep it going here.
Yeah.
But it was interesting. Yeah. So it was, being kind of like exposed to race, I think one of the biggest kind of moments for me coming here as a child, because I was dark and I had an afro, and it was like, people didn't know the difference in Middle East, and you know the word brown wasn't even in the vocabulary then. It was as either black or white, and I didn't fit the white category, so I must be black. So being kind of in that world was strange because I didn't know what that meant. And of course, there's a whole bunch of cultural components that go with it. I didn't fit in with one side or the other, and it was a strange place to be, which was the other. And so that's been kind of a focus for me, really, for many decades since we came here. And I decided to try to pay more attention to it because it wasn't just something that just you look at as far as appearance, but it affected everything in American society, everything from where you go to school, where you sit in the cafeteria, who your friends are, who you date, whose home you visit, who gets stopped by the police, all of that. It has race components in it. There's nothing in the United States, in America, that does not have race as somehow associated with it at some level or another.
And I think I remember listening to one of your TED Talks, I believe it was, where you said you had to check black, white, or other, and you weren't sure which one to pick, right?
I really wasn't sure because I didn't know what they meant, first of all. So at the beginning, I had no idea what they meant. And of course, then you're like, it's embarrassing. It's like, having to pick what you are is embarrassing. You're a human being, and that's all I saw myself as. So having to choose what team you're on seemed very strange.
And so
the teachers end up picking for me most of the time.
Got it. And you even mentioned that some of your classmates weren't sure what your race was, and that may have had you treated differently, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just my classmates. I remember when opening Busboys and Poets in 2005, one of the first questions people were asking is the owner black? And for many of the people, let's say the host at the front door, they say, I'm not sure. Like they'll go and ask me. I've had like many servers come and ask me, "Are you black?" Because customers ask them.
Yeah. So what do you think about the I believe I read it correctly, the census, they're going to be adding the MENA category. How do you feel?
I mean, I think for a lot of people in the Middle East, they feel invisible. And I think having their, a category in there, because oftentimes I think they lump us with Caucasians, and that doesn't seem like a a correct category, especially if we're still going to use race as a means to, allocate resources and other things. It just feels like, having a separate category, I think, is useful. We're not post-racial, so we can't pretend to be, and therefore I think we have to talk about it and identify it and move forward with it, with the hopes that someday we will actually become post-racial, so we don't have to think about race as a category for anything. We're human first. I remember asking, Nikki Giovanni, who was of course a Black poet. I said, "How do you identify first?" And she said, "As an earthling." And I thought, that's a good category to be in.
I think we should start adding that to job applicants.
I think so. Are you an earthling? Yes.
Yeah. So what kind of student were you in grade school and high school?
I was average. I studied hard though, and I think that gave me an edge, I guess. But I was really average. I also liked art, so I was an artist, and art was really my refuge in many ways, because you don't need to speak any language when you're doing art. I stuttered as a child, which made it really hard, especially if you're learning a foreign language. Plus, you have a speech impediment. It created more hardships, I think, for me than otherwise. So between the stuttering, looking different, all this, you feel like this odd person. I think sometimes that really helps to shape how you see the world, how you empathize with others who are different. And so I think that's, even though at the time it felt like so awful, I think it was really helpful for me to kind of focus a little bit more inward and think about where I fit in. And I think it gives you maybe better sense of yourself and how you fit in with others, and I think allows you to have maybe better emotional intelligence as you grow up, I think.
Yeah, you mentioned the speech impediment, and I think I read somewhere where you ended up seeing a therapist, and the therapist said, just stop thinking about it, or just do it.
Yeah, I mean, what she said actually, something like that, but also she said, that in order for you to overcome it, you have to stop being afraid of it. So it really became kind of this kind of mantra that I live my life with, which is anything you're afraid of, you have to confront. And that's something we hear all the time, right? If you're afraid of the dark, walk into the dark and, you'll move on. And I think with stuttering, fear is a huge part of why young people stutter. And they keep the stutter as they get older because that fear gets kind of deeply embedded into their psyche. So stuttering isn't about something wrong with your mouth or your tongue or the way you articulate words. It really is about your fear of speaking. And so they've done a lot of studies on it, and they found that people who stutter have, how your brain and your mouth kind of have to work in concert with each other. The brain has to tell them what to do, and then the mouth does what it's supposed to do, right? With people that stutter around the age of between 3 and 5 years old, when your language is really developing as a child, there's a little bit of a disconnect between those two. They're not in sync. And so because of that, you end up sort of having to stammer a little bit. And most people have that. That's not unusual. But for some kids, it's a little bit more pronounced than others. And the environment they're in and how they are perceived when they start doing that can then help shape the way they think about how they speak and how they're heard by others. And so, in my case, I guess it was more profound or more pronounced, I should say. And so I kept it, and it became. And what happens is when you start stuttering, you start as a kid. Let's say you say the word, and people laugh, or they think, "Oh, that sounds funny. What are you saying? How come you saying it so funny?" Then you start like not using that word anymore, because that word becomes your stumbling block. So let's say the word tree is the word I stumble on. And if every time I say the word tree, I stumble, I'm going to stop using the word tree. So I'm going to replace it with something else. And then I have to think of another word for tree. And now I've got like this additional vocabulary in my head to use to replace the word tree. So whenever I'm talking about tree, I'll say, that palm out there or that pine out there instead of saying tree. And so then you start having this thesaurus in your head of words that you can quickly modify once you get to a stumbling block. So that as you get older, if you keep doing that, your vocabulary becomes really complicated and your talking becomes very complicated, very convoluted. And so people started thinking like, he could have said that in 3 words. Why is he taking 30 words to say it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It becomes kind of strange. And so anyway, I wanted to overcome it. I wanted to do that. And this particular, and I tried everything. I tried breathing exercises, rolling on the floor. I don't know if you ever saw The King's Speech.
I did.
The movie?
Yep.
He stuttered. And so they were trying to give him therapy to overcome it. And, of course, nothing really works with stuttering unless you deal with the root cause, and that is the fear. So I met this one therapist who had a small practice in DuPont Circle here in DC. And she said to me, she says, this was very new back then. This is maybe over 30 years ago. She said, this is a very new theory that I developed called fear reduction therapy. And fear reduction therapy says that if you reduce the fear of stuttering, you actually stop stuttering. So in order for you to reduce the fear of stuttering, I need you to stutter more.
Oh.
And stutter more openly and be comfortable with it. Well, that's easier said than done, So one of my first therapy sessions actually was sitting in front of her with the telephone. And she said, I want you to pick up the phone, dial 411. And back then, actually, there was an operator that answered the phone. Dial 411. When the operator answers, ask her for a phone number and an address of someone. And I want you to stutter the entire time. Don't hide words. Don't change words. Don't worry about it. Just stutter through it. And it took, 10 minutes to ask for a phone number and an address. And I was exhausted by the end of the short conversation. And when I was done, I was like, phew, you hang up the phone. And she said, well, how did that feel? And I said, it felt amazing. It felt so liberating, And so, now she said, well, this is the easy part. You're sitting in front of me talking to a stranger. Now you have to go outside and talk to people and talk to people that know you. And you have to know how to navigate that without feeling so embarrassed by it. And so I started telling people I stutter, so bear with me, so people know right off the bat that you stutter. That is nothing. It's not a joke. It's not something funny. It's not something you can make fun of, but something you should respect that individual's, handicap. And so that really worked. And but it took a while. It wasn't like overnight, for sure. It took many years of constantly throwing myself basically in situations that are difficult for a stutterer, speaking in front of large groups, getting uncomfortable. And then,
Yeah, that's powerful. So it's interesting because I'm used to being on the other end of these talks and just kind of going with the flow, answering questions. And I found that being a podcast host is a completely different ballgame. And I find myself having to slow down sometimes as well and sort of pay attention to what I'm saying. So I can appreciate that. Any pieces of advice that you would want to give to individuals that may have a stuttering issue right now or impediment?
Yeah, I mean, deal with it. For a long time, I really didn't want to deal with it. I thought it would just go away on its own. I thought it would just be, I'll grow it, all of that. And I think I lost many years of wanting to say things. I remember being in class and not asking a question. I didn't want to raise my hand. I didn't want to be the person to ask. And I would walk away, not knowing something or feeling bad that I didn't, raise my hand to ask or challenge somebody on an issue. So, yeah, I mean, I think my only advice is, and it's an advice really for anything that you confront. It's not just stuttering. Any kind of issue that you're dealing with, is face it. It's like it's you, own it. And it's so funny because it sort of reminds me of a thing. When I first was looking at the space at 14th and V, the Busboys and Poets there, the space was a big open space, 7,000 square feet. And in one corner of it, there was a bump, this concrete bump that just came out from the ground. And it was kind of an eyesore. And I talked with the architect. I said, "What is that bump for?" He said, "Well, that's it's for the garage below. It's where the entrance of the cars go in. They have to raise, that area. And so that's why it looks like this bump that's sitting there." And I thought, well, let's put like some drywall around it and use it as a storage space or something like that, kind of hide it away. And he said, "No," he said, "you should not do that." He said, this bump is calling you to feature it. He said, "If you find a flaw in something, feature it, don't hide it. And the more you hide the flaw, the less authentic the space looks, and the less authentic you appear. So if you have a flaw, feature it. Don't run away from it." And the Japanese have a term for that, for like their pottery. The pottery that has a flaw in it is considered extremely valuable, as opposed to the pottery that's perfect. So imperfections make us who we are. It makes us human, and they make us unique.
Yeah, I hope everybody listening to this really appreciates that, because those are powerful words, and thank you.
Yeah.
What kind, when you were in school or at a young age, what was your escape? If you did have the speech impediment and maybe you weren't comfortable talking to people, was it art? Was it reading? Was it poetry?
Art.
Okay.
I mean, I remember not feeling comfortable sitting in the cafeteria for many reasons. I didn't have any friends, really. I didn't speak English, and so it was kind of lonely. And I was very young as well. My father had this brilliant idea that, if he could push me forward several grades, I would like finish faster. And that for whatever reason, they think that's a good thing. I would never push my child to move any faster than they absolutely have to. And the more you hold them back, the better, actually. Life is not a race. I think for a lot of parents at a certain generation, maybe they thought, if you just get done really quick, if you become a doctor at age 20, like, that's amazing, but no, it's not, because you have so much emotional growth that you haven't achieved. You have, you really get stunted in many ways. So here I am at 10 years old. I'm in 8th grade.
Wow.
Not a pretty sight at all.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I looked older, which may or may not have been an advantage. I looked a little older. But at 10, I mean, that's another obstacle you have to deal with. I mean, in college, I had to lie about my age all the time for anything, to get a drink, to get a date, to get anything. It was like always you had to lie about your age. So I lost track of my lies. I didn't know whether I was like 3 years older, 4 years older. Sometimes I would say a date, sometimes I forget. It was just really stupid. And but yeah, my escape was, actually, I had an art teacher who was like amazing. And she recognized that I had talent, so she really had an affinity for me. And I remember her walking through the cafeteria one time, seeing me sitting alone, and she said, "Why don't you come with me?" And I took my tray of food and walked behind her, and she took me to her art class. And she was sitting grading papers or doing something, and I was sitting on one of the chairs. And when I finished eating, I would get stuff and I start painting or drawing or doing something with art. And that was really cool. I really enjoyed that. So I looked forward to like lunchtime because I spent it doing art. It was my favorite subject.
That's amazing. Sometimes it's important for the teachers to give us that opportunity, right?
Oh, yeah. It's amazing how teachers have such a huge impact on kids. And sometimes one encounter can make a huge difference in one child's life, really.
Yeah. And talk to me about your parents a little bit. What influence did they have on you other than pushing you through school?
Well, my parents are immigrants, and they my father had a PhD in literature, and so and it's like Middle Eastern literature, so it wasn't something very useful in the United States at that time. And so when he decided to stay, he had to find a job, and finding a job, in the United States with a literature PhD was not very useful. And so he went ahead and accepted actually a job to teach, I think teach Arabic or something, in the Middle Eastern Studies department at Utah State University, and accepted the position. And then very last minute, he ended up not going there because a friend of his told him that, why don't you buy a restaurant instead? So here he is, this guy who is a diplomat. My father did not enjoy serving others. That wasn't his thing. He was sort of very patriarchal, and but went ahead and bought the business. And it was a small pizza shop that sold sandwiches in a strip mall in Annandale, Virginia, of all places, which is a suburb right outside of DC. And, overnight he became a restaurant owner, having had zero experience in restaurants. We hardly even ate out, let alone, own a restaurant. And so here he is, but the restaurant was like already running, was doing well, and the staff didn't even know it was sold. It was like one of those seamless sales, that happened. It was from one Arab owner to another Arab owner, so there wasn't a real difference. Most of the staff was Arabic speaking, and so it was an easy transition in that sense. So my father ended up owning a restaurant, which did really well. Had him buy a home, put us through college. Was pretty good in that sense. But my father was not a businessman per se, certainly not a restaurateur. And he hated the business, really didn't like it. I mean, he liked, of course, what it afforded him, but he didn't relish the idea of serving people. And really, like many immigrant families, they never wanted their kids to be in the business. They wanted their kids to, wear a suit and tie to work and have a secretary and maybe a driver or something like that. They didn't want you to do that. They didn't want you to be in a business that is greasy and smelly and long hours and mopping floors and serving people, God forbid, that kind of business. And so I really kind of like said, you know what, I kind of like this business actually. But I was supposed to be a doctor. My brother was supposed to be an engineer. Sort of typical Middle Eastern standards, and they got 50% of that deal. My brother's an engineer, and I'm not.
Well, technically, you did go to medical school for a little bit.
I did. It was a very, very short-lived experience, much to my parents' chagrin, who didn't find out about it till months later. And it really broke the relationship in a very severe way. And for a long time, I did not speak to them. It was a very tough break. And I mean, it's to this day, I think, my mom is still alive, and to this day, she thinks I'm a doctor.
Yeah.
I mean, she much prefer if I was, that's for sure. I've had great success in the business, but to her, that's nice, but
Well, I'm going to put this out into the universe. Howard University, please give Andy an honorary doctorate.
An honorary degree. Definitely don't give me a medical degree. That would be really bad. Do not do that. Yeah, definitely don't do that. Yeah.
So you went to Catholic though for your undergrad?
I was Catholic undergrad.
What was your major there?
I'm sorry?
What was your major there?
Biology.
Biology. Okay.
Yeah, of course.
Wow.
Then I went to Howard for a very short time, and then after I left there many years ago, like about 7, maybe 5 years ago, maybe I got an MBA.
Nice.
Yeah, and
you really like to switch it up on yourself.
It's like, okay, I think I need an MBA. Because it was one of those things that I wanted to learn, secrets of business. Like I did business kind of by winging it, really. I mean, it's like, okay, what is there to know about? When I first opened Busboys and Poets, I had no idea what a pro forma was. I had no idea what a business plan was. I didn't know any of these things. And it's like, why do you need to have that? It's like, okay, like simple math. You have to make more than you spend, and that's the end. Like, why do I have to make it more complicated than that? And of course, it's a slightly more complicated than that, but not much more. I mean, you can actually have absolutely no education whatsoever, and that if you buy something for $10 and sell it for 20, you're gonna, there's a profit in there. Hopefully, if you keep your other costs in line, and so that kind of logic was in my head. And it seemed like it made sense, and it let me go for a long time, and I could have gone all my life without having to have an MBA. But learning about finance and learning about this just interesting, I think, more than anything else, frankly. The other part is you realize that the thing about business sometimes, or business school or MBAs specifically, I think they suck the creativity out of you a little bit. And I think for me, I was thinking, and I would tell my professors, because I was kind of like the anomaly in the class, right? Most of the class, people in their 30s, maybe, looking, to advance in their careers and so on. I'm like, I'm not looking for an advancement in my career. I'm just want to have fun, And so I'm this oddball in this class, right? And so I'm always challenging the professors, because I know what's real, and this is all theoretical, what you're telling me, but I've actually done this, and so it's this sort of, one of the things that had dawned on me is that if I had done this before opening my restaurant, I would have never opened my restaurant.
Wow.
Really? I mean, I said that. I said, I don't think MBA scared the shit out of me. Like the whole idea of risk and cost of money and all this stuff was like scary. And if I had to sit there and crunch numbers, and I would have stayed up late nights, and I would have been really nervous about opening and not feeling very confident at all, because the risk was great. But it never dawned on me that the risk was great, because I was too stupid to really think about it, like in some ways, right? So I think the more you learn, sometimes the scarier things seem. And so for me, not having an MBA was actually a plus. Having it afterwards, I think it has helped me since I've had it, but not in the way that I think sometimes these types of things can help you.
Yeah. So I want to just go back a few steps to, you mentioned that your parents weren't happy that you didn't finish medical school, and that created maybe some challenges with the relationship. How did you navigate that over time? Because as a Palestinian, I know it's hard to get that trust back, right? From your parents coming from a Middle Eastern background.
I'm the black sheep of the family. So I don't, for me, it was like, okay, whatever. If they don't want to talk to me, that's their loss. Like I I never really, I didn't sweat a lot over it. I have to admit, I was not a good child in that way. I'm not your typical Middle Eastern kid who like worships their parents and all of that. It's like it's a mutual relationship, you know, and we're on equal footing here. I mean, it's a give and take. So I tend to be a little bit more that way, I think.
Do you treat, if I may ask, do you have kids?
I do.
And do you treat your kids with that same
Yes.
logic? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I don't want to say it's a transactional relationship. That's not what I'm saying, but I do believe that at some level, I think, I don't know. I'm, having deference to someone who's older than you, just to have deference, I don't think is necessary or should be. I think you have to earn respect and give it back. And, I think parents are not perfect. Parents make mistakes. Parents make bad decisions, and I feel like sometimes having kids that check you and tell you, I don't think that's a good idea, is not a bad thing. It's not like just because the parent said it, it means it's right. I don't think that's necessary. So I challenged my parents a lot. And I still, my mother's 94 years old. I challenge her every day. And my siblings, sometimes will kind of berate me about that. They say, she's 94, like, leave her alone. Why do you have to challenge her about everything? And I said, well, you know what? I challenge you because I respect her. I respect her intellect. I said, if you stop challenging somebody, it means you're saying they're totally useless, that they're just waiting to die. Mm. And to me, that's unfair. So if you think a human being can evolve till the day they step into their grave, then you should challenge them, on anything. It doesn't mean I'm right. I'm just challenging her. If she says this is wrong, I'll say why. I don't think it's wrong. And we can have a conversation about it. And who knows? She might think, okay. Now, it's harder to change somebody's mind that's that old, right? But it's not impossible. And I think I think parents appreciate being challenged. They may not love it in the moment, but I think they appreciate it over time. I have respect for my kids that challenge me.
Yeah. It's eerie how similar you and I are. So, and the reason I'm going to share that is, if I'm not mistaken, your birthday is March 21st, right?
Yes, that's true.
My birthday is March 21st.
Oh my God. So, that's weird as hell. Yeah. I had no idea. Well, happy birthday.
Man, happy birthday to you as well.
Thank you.
So my father was in the restaurant business, and my dad actually died at 51. And he quite literally worked himself to death. Relatively unhealthy, a smoker, the old school Middle Eastern philosophy of just, smoking and eating without exercising kind of thing. And he worked himself to death and became very unhealthy and ended up passing at 51. And I always told myself, there's no way I'm going to get into the restaurant business. Although I did build my character there, although I did learn the importance of hard work and rolling up your sleeves and dealing with every sort of personality. That can't be understated, right?
That's absolutely true.
Yeah, working that. So it's an important skill set, but I always told myself there was no way I would get into the restaurant business. Seeing what your dad, maybe it's a little bit different, but seeing what your dad went through, and the fact that, same as me, they said, don't get into the restaurant business. I'm going to work hard to get you into college to do something else. I was supposed to be an engineer, by the way. That failed miserably. Horrible at math. But why?
But you're a professor, and you're a PhD. So you fulfilled a big chunk of the. Professor was probably third in the categories of Middle Eastern parents.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah.
No, that's fair. I appreciate that. But seeing what your dad went through and basically discouraging you from opening a restaurant, why did you decide to do it?
Oh, just to piss him off. No, it wasn't just that. But,
again, you and I are similar, so there you go.
There we go. No, I think in a way, I sort of fell into it. Honestly, when I decided that I wasn't going to go to school and I dropped out, I started waiting tables because I was familiar with that. I was good at it, because I knew the ins and outs of the restaurant business. Because as we were teenagers, my brother and I basically ran the restaurant. We'd come after school, we'd walk over there, maybe do a little homework, and then get to work. So we were like hands on, and we made it work. And so I think it allowed us to learn it from the bottom up.
Yeah.
So it was not a difficult transition in that sense, because I was familiar with what to expect.
Yeah. And what inspired you to open up Busboys and Poets? And if you could talk about the name as well. I know many people know about it, but just in case.
Yeah, I mean, I think Busboys and Poets was the kind of place that I wanted to be at, that I wanted to go to. I knew the restaurant business very well. I was good at it. I knew it from the inside out. I knew how to cook. I knew how to wait tables. I knew how to deal with customers, all of those things. And I wanted something. So I started waiting tables after I left school, and I started climbing the ranks in the restaurant business. Right, I waited tables at a small little place. Then I went to a bigger, kind of finer dining place. Then I went to an ultra fine dining place that was at Capitol Hill, that catered to senators and congressmen and people like that. And then I got promoted to management, much to my chagrin at that point, because I really did not want to get into management at that point. I wanted to have the freedom to be able to do what I wanted, to write, to just think about what I want to do in my life, allow myself that space. But as it turned out, that wasn't there. Then I started to have to think about, well, I've got to think of a career. I got to think of something to do. I thought about going back to school, but at that point, my relationship with my parents wasn't great. I didn't know how I would do that. I didn't want to go begging, on my hands and knees. That wasn't going to happen. So I had a very hard time trying to figure out what to do, honestly. And so the restaurant business became an easy in for me. And then when I got into management, it became more sort of a career, quote unquote, feel to it. And I decided, well, if I want to make a career out of restaurant business, I need to not work in a mom and pop operation. I need to work in something bigger, more corporates, allow for more, opportunities for advancement and so on. So I decided to go work in hotels. So I worked at Omni Hotels. They own the Shoreham Hotel here in DC. So I worked there, and I got into management, food and beverage management, and so on. And then I ended up leaving there. And it's funny. I ended up leaving. Sometimes obstacles get in the way, but they open up other doors. They always do, frankly. I left because I thought I was overlooked for an opportunity, and I thought that was an unfair thing that happened. And I think largely because I was Middle Eastern and the person they hired was European. And, hotels are very big into the European kind of thing, especially high-end hotels tend to have a French or German or Dutch, or, usually if you have a slight British accent, you really rise in the ranks with the hotels. And if you have the right look, no mustache, good hair, and a white face, you end up really advancing very, very nicely in the hotel industry. I didn't fit any of those categories, and so it became obvious to me that I wasn't going to advance the same way that anyone else who is, more European than I would. And so I decided, you know what, I'm never going to grow in this business on my own. Through the ranks of a corporate structure, I need to figure out a way to do my own place.
Yeah.
And really, that's kind of opened up the door for me to go there.
And did you just sort of say to yourself, you know what, I'm going to open up a restaurant? You got into a car?
Well, so I ate crow and went back to my father and said, you have this old business that's been still running, that's kind of puttering along, not doing very well. Why don't you let me take it and turn it around and make it something really exciting? At that point, I had, learned a lot, gone through a lot of different iterations and so on. So I convinced him to allow me to take back the old restaurant and turn it into something more hip and modern for the time.
Hmm.
And so what I did is I took this old pizza place that was kind of getting tired, frankly, and I popped it. I scrubbed it out, cleaned it up really well. I took the menu and I just shrank it in like almost nothing. I traveled I remember going to San Francisco and went to different restaurants there and learned bits and pieces of restaurants in that area. I came back and I decided, you know what? I'm going to do pasta, which was something people didn't say. They said spaghetti back then. That was the mid 80s. I'm going to do pasta. I'm going to do different types of sauces. And it's not going to be the sauces where you sit and boil for like hours and hours, but this is a la minute sauces where you just make them to order kind of thing. And I'm going to have things like pesto and sun-dried tomatoes and pine nuts and olive oil and balsamic vinegar and those things that were completely new back then. And, I'm going to have a very simple menu, 2 types of pasta, 10 types of sauces, 3 salads, and cheesecake for dessert. And that was it. That was the entire menu. And sure enough, within literally weeks, the place had a line at the door. I was the cook. And, I was like, my father was, I think, for the first time, rather impressed by my, ability to do that. But nonetheless, I didn't own the place. It was my father's, but I felt like I owned it because it was my father's. He paid me a salary basically. So I wasn't like, raking the dough or anything like that. The arrangement was definitely heavily weighted to his favor. And I ended up running this place on my own with, a couple of other people to help me, a handful of, an extra cook, a dishwasher, a couple of waiters, and that was it. And I had these 2 guys, they used to come there all the time, an Indian guy and an Italian guy. They were friends. And they came there all the time to eat. And they loved the food. And they both had the same name. They were both named Bobby. It was like so funny, So Bobby the Indian and Bobby the Italian. And so both named Bobby and Bobby. And they both said Bobby. Like, it wasn't Bob and Bobby, it was Bobby, And so, that sounds so funny. Sounds like a joke. Anyway, Bobby won. The Italian Bobby came up to me one time and he said, the other Bobby and I have been thinking about, opening a business like this. And we have a Italian grocery store in Centerville, Virginia, but we've been looking for a restaurant. And we think this is a great restaurant. We want to buy it from you. Would you want to sell it? And of course, it wasn't mine to sell, really. So I said, well, sure, how much you want to pay, that kind of thing. And I think they came back like this day. He said, we thought about it. We see the business. We've been counting, like sitting in the counter, with a little counter in the corner, counting how many people go in, how much they spend, kind of estimating what kind of potential this place has. They said, we'll have to look at the lease. We'll have to look at this, but, somewhere in there, $150,000 or something. And I thought, my eyes, ooh, I've never seen $150,000 in my life, So I tried to play it coy, I said, well, I don't know, no, that's right, or whatever. Let me think about it.
Did you learn those
I remember.
Did you learn the negotiation skills in medical school?
I don't know where I learned them, honestly, but it was one of those things that I had no idea how to make this work. I just knew that it sounded good, but I didn't know what good was. I didn't know how much good is, and so on. So I said, okay, let me think about it. So I went back to my father and I said, hey, listen, Dad, there are these people that want to buy the place for 150,000. And he says, forget it. And for my father, it's like, it's really better to have me working there than him to sell it for 150,000. Like for him, it's a regular income.
Right.
Why sell it and lose the income? Uh, and so he was kind of skeptical about it and said, yeah, people say that all the time. It's probably not true, blah, blah, blah. So I went back but I didn't take his word. I went back to Bobby, the other Bobby, when he came back the next day. He said, what do you think? And I said, well, maybe 200,000 just to see how far it goes. And he said, well, how about 175? And I knew that was going to be the I said, okay, let me run that past. So I went back to my father and said, look, 175, like I want to open a place in DC. I think this place has gone like I wanted to. I want a place in DC. Let's sell it. And you can partner with me in a place in DC. And so my father was okay, at that point. And so we sold it and opened a place in DC. Yeah.
And I just want everybody to hear who doesn't already know this, but why the name Busboy and Poets?
Well, I didn't open Busboys and Poets.
Yeah. Oh, that was in the first. Okay.
No. That was like 3 iterations later.
Oh, okay. What was the first one?
The first place I opened was, I decided, well, I'm good at Italian. Okay. I got that down pat.
Okay.
Let me try Middle Eastern, because I knew how to cook that stuff too. And so I decided I'm going to make a Middle Eastern place. I'm going to call it Skewers. And it's going to be this hip, modern version of Middle Eastern. It's going to have all the mezza stuff, the usual mezza stuff you find in Middle Eastern restaurants, like hummus and baba ganoush and hamara and fool and, things like that, Lebni. And I'm also going to have, rice and kebabs and salads and really make them look fun and sexy and cool. And, that's going to be the restaurant. And I opened it, and it was open with a shoestring. I did the artwork on the walls. I did the menu. I did the, like everything from A to Z, literally bought used furniture, etc. And it opened the doors, and it didn't do great. And it was like a shock to me, because up till then I was like, I'm on a roll,
Yeah.
And I was like, oh shit, like, how am I going to make this work? And so I got kind of really scared for a while there, because I put everything into it. And here I am lost, something that was actually working. And now I've got this that is not working. And so remember the first few days we'd get like 20 customers a night. And it was like, ugh, this is awful. And as much as I tried to make it work, it was hard. It just wasn't working that well. But the food was really good. It just wasn't, I didn't make the effort to go out there and promote it in the way that I should have. I was too busy opening it and not focused on people coming in. It just was in my imagination that people are going to show up. But, unless people know, and word of mouth has to grow fast, it's really hard. And social media wasn't available then, so you really could not get the word out unless you take an ad in the paper. And by the time you do that, and, ads are always like weird, and, people don't always respond to them. Anyway, so I wrote to the food critic of the Washington Post. Her name was Phyllis Richmond back then. And she was the food critic of the Washington Post, was like Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and the Washington Post combined.
Wow.
Like one word from her could mean the difference between life and death. She was so powerful that she would receive death threats fairly often for her reviews. Because people put their life on the line for businesses. And she, as a food critic, can go and say, this place sucks, And so that meant that the place, if she said the place sucked, it'd be very hard for that place to recover. She was that powerful.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, that's no longer, food critics say whatever they want now. Nobody really.
But you took the risk and you invited that critique.
Yeah. I mean, I because I had no choice. I was like in a state of like, I got to like make it or break it, And so I invited her in, and it was a long shot because they don't review restaurants. They have hundreds of restaurants all the time. So she has to pick and choose what she reviews. Right. And she had one review, and unlike like social media, she had one restaurant to review a week. Only one.
Right.
It wasn't like online, once in a while she'll throw something. No, there was nothing like that. It was just one restaurant a week, period. And so it was 52 restaurants in the entire year that she got to review. And those 52 restaurants had to be like special enough for her to get out of her way to review them, right? So I don't know what caught her attention, but somehow she showed up in my place. And I knew what she looked like. She was like secretive. Back then, she used to wear wigs and hats and come in different, disguises. And she would send people in early to kind of stake out the seat. Then she would just sneak in and sit, that kind of stuff. It was a lot of that. But I recognized her. I'd seen her picture at the Shoreham Hotel. We had a picture of her in the back. Everybody knew what she looked like. People were always on alert. There was more sightings, false sightings of her than I can imagine, I mean, every time somebody came that sort of looked like her, people said, I think that might be Phyllis Richmond, And so people would go into this sort of attention, and it turned out to be probably not her. But this one I knew was her, I'd seen her up close before and seen her picture, and I knew that was her. And so when she walked in, the dining room probably had like 3 other tables, and she was like the other table. And my thing was like, get in the kitchen. Like for me, the kitchen is the heartbeat. And unless the food is good, they can forgive you on service a little bit, but not on food.
Right.
So I went in the kitchen. I made sure that her dish was perfection. I also made sure that all the people around her were having a great time as well, because she pays attention, not just to her food, to everybody else's as well. Because she wants to know whether, if you're going to put like a little flour on her dish, how come there's no flour on that other dish?
Right.
She'll know that you're onto something, So the idea is like, make her think that you don't know her was the key, but also make it perfect. So anyway, she came that day, and she eats, she left. Then she came back. She used to come back 3 times. That was her thing. Come back 3 times to the restaurant and try different things at 3 times, different meal periods sometimes, and so on. So she came back 3 other times because I was there constantly. I never left the place. Right. And I sure wasn't going to leave the place once I saw her that day. So she came back 3 times, and then you get the phone call from, hi, this is the Washington Post calling. We want to send a photographer. And that was like, you just won acceptance to like the most important school in your life, And so, it's like, yes. Oh, shit. Oh, like it was like both a relief and fear beyond fear, because you don't know where it's going to go, So
were you about to, how close were you to maybe closing down? Or
very close, like super close, like weeks. We're talking like I was running on fumes. I was juggling, bills like a circus clown. I mean, it was just ridiculous. It was really ridiculous. I mean, yeah.
And then after
I ended up, so, back then also, it took weeks for the review to come out, because she would review ahead of time, and by the time they sent it to printers and do, layout, they didn't have computers to do all these things. It was like everything had to be done by hand. It took weeks and blah, blah, blah. And also, when the newspaper came out, you didn't see it 3 or 4 days ahead of time. You saw it that day when the newspaper is in your hand. There was no online version. So it was really kind of scary, So finally, the day came when the newspaper was going to be out. And it came out on Sundays. It was in the magazine, the Washington Post magazine. And I couldn't sleep that night, of course. Here I am Saturday at 2 a.m. or Sunday at 2 a.m. I'm laying in bed looking up at the ceiling and tossing and turning, knowing my paper is already getting printed. And, with my life, basically my future, in this one page in the newspaper. Crazy, right?
That's crazy. Yeah.
So 4:00 in the morning, I get out of bed because there's no point in laying down. I dress up and I drive to the Washington Post on 15th Street.
Wow.
And I remembered it was a slightly misty day. And it was in October. It was somewhat balmy for the time. And I drove down there. There was no cars on the road, hardly. And because it was Sunday anyway, I get to Washington Post and I park my car across the street from the Washington Post. And I see, trucks are going by and they're starting to load up the newspapers because they come out around 4 or 5 back then. And so I get out of the car and I walk over to the guy who's loading it up. And I said, "Can I get a copy?" And he says, "Hell no. You got to get it from, once it gets to the store." And I think I just begged him a lot and started crying.
Well, you have a lot. You have a lot on the line at that moment.
Yeah. I think he saw tears in my eyes, and he just said, "This person might just commit suicide if I don't give it to him." He pulled out one of the papers and handed it to me, and I took the paper after thanking profusely, and I walked back to my car, sat down in the car, and just looked just straight ahead, and really waited for a while. And try to figure out what to do next. And it was pretty scary. Excuse me. Thank you. So I was trying to figure out what to do next. And I was looking, and I had it like this in my chest, right? The newspaper. Sorry for the interruption. We had anyway.
Anybody who's listening, he is actually at Busboys and Poets working. So this is great.
Yep. So I'm sitting there and I'm thinking I need to open this. It was how you get a letter from an acceptance letter for your favorite school, and you don't know, you said that you don't know whether to open it or not. But right now, I think for a lot of people that know how this works, if the envelope is big, that means you got accepted. If the envelope is really small, it means you probably got rejected. But in this case, it was I'm trying to find out whether I got accepted or rejected, So I pull out the magazine and I'm leafing it off like this, trying to open one page at a time, trying to look at the table of content, because table of content had the title of the article. And the title of the article determines what the article is about. And I remember opening the page and finally seeing it, and it said, "Simple and Spirited." And I opened it up and I started reading, and it says, "Washington hasn't had at least a restaurant for a while, and certainly hasn't had one like Busboys and Poets. Skewers." And it's something. It's really a fun place to go to. And so that was really kind of wow. I just was woo.
Right.
Very, very exciting moment. I remember, driving home, on cloud 9. My wife was already up by then. And I said, "You can't believe this. You can't believe this. Look at this," And so we were really excited. And of course, I decided to go early to the restaurant because I knew that things will be very different. So we went from 20 covers a night to 200.
Wow.
Which sounds like a gift, but it was a horror show. It was terrible. I was like, oh shit. Like what you don't want to have is people come in and not come back,
Yeah.
And so trying to like change the tires while you're flying was really, really hard. And it was really tough. And it made it really harder. What made it even harder is that weekend, the weekend following, the weekend when it came out, because that ends up to be the busiest weekend, because the paper comes out on Sunday, and a lot of people eat out on Saturday and Sunday, on Saturday and Friday. So the next Friday and Saturday would be like the biggest weekend for you, right?
Yeah.
So I was trying to like speed it up so I can be ready. I mean, we had much more business during the week as well, but I wanted to be ready for the big onslaught that will come on Friday and Saturday. To add insult to injury, that weekend happened to be also the weekend of the largest gay march on Washington. Brought in something like 500,000 people or some ridiculous number. And we were in DuPont Circle, which is kind of like the gay area in DC. So here we are in the center. Our review just came out. The largest gay march in Washington is like the perfect storm. Well, a storm it was. I mean, talk about having our ass handed to us. It was Marjan, my wife, brought in, I think, 4 of her friends just to help host.
Right.
Said, we need you. Just get over here. The bar area was so crowded. It was like a mosh pit at a Madonna concert. It was crazy. I mean, it was just crazy. People were like jumping over each other to get in, trying to make a deal about, reservations. I thought like, this is like the dream of every restaurant owner, right? You're like the hottest place in town, basically. And like, I'm thinking, this is messed up. Like I kind of slow down a little bit, I'm not ready for all this. And there's no way to be ready for all this. Anyway, it took a couple of weeks to adjust, but certainly helped to kickstart my career, certainly. And I remember years later, I saw Phyllis Richmond in person, and I told her, it was at an event. She had already retired as a food critic, and I said, you are the reason why I'm in the restaurant business. If it wasn't for you, I would have probably, I don't know, but I would have done. I mean, gone out and did something else. I was going to become a history major, actually. Yeah.
It jives. I mean, another pivot. Yeah.
I was going to do history. I was going to go back to school, get a PhD in history, and become a professor. And I'll be doing podcasts like you're doing.
Well, hey, you're free to take this one over anytime.
Well, you do much better than I do. But yeah, that was kind of the beginning. And so, I opened other places and blah, blah, blah. It's a longer story, but Busboys and Poets was an iteration, several iterations after that. I opened 2 other places after that, and then Busboys and Poets. Of course, I got very political. The whole thing of the restaurant was exciting, but for me, restaurants are an opportunity rather than an end in themselves. I see them as like the watering hole for a community. It has to be good. The water has to be really fresh and delicious for them to come to it. But once they're there, I want to make sure that it's not just about having water and eating. It's also about connecting with people. And, food is an incredible connector in every culture. And so no matter what political leanings you have, no matter where you are in life, food brings people to the table, literally. And so I wanted to use that opportunity to do that on a regular basis. And so I started slowly building, I started working in political campaigns. I started working in Democratic Party campaigns. I started doing all kinds of stuff and using the restaurant as a platform sometimes to bring people in, to have these conversations, to invite people for, you can always invite somebody for dinner, like they're going to show up,
But that was a risk as a business person opening a restaurant. Wasn't that a risk, an inherent risk, combining food with?
Well, I mean, they always tell you that, but I don't know. I don't think that way. I think I don't have multiple lives. I have one life, and for me, I can't compartmentalize things in my life. My business is the center, and everything else revolves around it and in it. I remember when I got married with Marjan, I said to her, I said, I just want you to know that my business comes before you, and unless you're willing to accept that, I don't think it'll work. For me, the business comes first, more than anything else. And people say, like, that's so weird and cruel and strange and all this. But you know what? You don't want to be married to somebody who's not doing well. I mean, it ruins everything.
Right.
I think on so many levels. For me, it's really important to have a stable, solid foundation to work with, and everything else falls in place. Doesn't mean that obviously I'm not ridiculous about it, but it just means that if it's our anniversary and we have a dinner planned and something goes wrong at the restaurant that I have to go to, that plan is going to be put on hold.
Yeah.
And some people don't understand that. They think, like, how could you? I mean, there's a cost to it. There's no doubt there's a cost. Being in the business, I'm like knee deep all the time. I go full force. I don't do like tiptoe thing, so I've missed my kids' birthdays. I've missed championship games. I've missed, it's a cost. It's not, as you can't deny that, but you try to make it balanced at some level, but the business takes priority for me.
Would you do any of it all over again if you had a chance?
I mean, that's always an odd question, because I don't know what to say to that. Would I? I mean, who would I be today? I don't know. I don't know. I'm happy with me today, I guess. So I don't know if I would do it over again. I think I think one of the things you learn as you grow older is that there's no such thing as mistakes in life, that they're all lessons. Everything you do is a lesson. So sometimes those lessons set you back, but they set you back to regroup, realign, redirect, whatever it is that you need to do in order to move forward again. So I don't, for me, setbacks are, they're painful, but they're temporary, and then you just realign and readjust, I mean, when I left school, I remember, like, for a while there, I didn't have a place to stay. I left my parents. I didn't know what to do. I slept in my car, and then I advanced to sleeping in this hooker hotel that they charge like $10 a night. We had to share a bathroom in a very weird part of town, because that was like a roof. So I do I have any regrets? Probably not. I mean, I don't think that any of these things, because back then I didn't think of them as like horrible things. I just thought that's what you do. You survive.
Yeah.
I didn't dwell on the horrors. I dwelled on what's next.
So it's interesting, when I visited the restaurant or Busboys and Poets in Shirlington for the talk, or the panel rather, I've done thousands of different discussions and panels, if not more. So, but when I got there, I felt home right away. It was a crazy feeling. I wasn't worried about anything. I wasn't worried about the crowd or obviously we're talking about Palestine, right? I felt home. I felt safe. I felt that psychological safety. And I can't help but think that's coming from you. and sort of what you've embedded within the whole model. Is that fair to say?
Well, Pamela is great, first of all. I mean, she gets it. She was the first events and marketing director we had when we first opened. She went on to work for the Arlington County government, and now she's going to start back with us in a couple of weeks to do some, freelance stuff because I really love her. She's wonderful. But I do think there's something to be said about stuff that comes from the top. It's much like what is happening today with DEI, for instance, all that DEI stuff. Sometimes you have a CEO that is not buying into it and they say, we got to do DEI, so we'll let HR do it. And that's, check off the box kind of thing. None of the things we do really is to check off the box in that regard. It's all done authentically. It's all done with a cause, with a purpose. It's funny. It's and knock on wood, honestly, and we don't get a lot of hate at all. Despite the controversial stuff that we deal with. I mean, people like Angela Davis, people like yourself, people like Norm Finkelstein, people like that. We had Norm Finkelstein last night at our place. We had, he is a lightning rod for anybody who wants to go after anybody, not one comment, not one phone call. We had probably close to 1,000 people. There were 500 people inside the restaurant and another 500 outside. And not one issue. That's remarkable, I think. I don't know why. Honestly, I don't have an answer. But I do feel that we create a place, and we talk about it, where it's really about authentically bringing the community together. It's not a business plan idea. It's not like I woke up one day and I said, I wonder how I can make money. Let me think I'll bring just famous authors and talk about politics because that makes money. It's the last thing in my mind, honestly. And I think it's really about I want to do this because I think it's a good thing to do. And I think it's a smart thing to do and fun thing to do. And it's really, it fulfills me, my life. And again, going back to compartmentalizing, I don't want to come and work in this business and then afterwards go somewhere else to try to fulfill myself with the stuff that I need for my spiritual growth. I want to make it all part of the same thing. So I want to make my business kind of part of that. And I think that's why it probably works. I don't know. And I'm glad you feel that way because that was the intention. And if you felt that way, means that we've done something right.
Yeah, and that's the challenge with organizations. They expect their employees to compartmentalize different parts of their life and keep it separate. And we're learning within the DE9 space, obviously, that's impossible.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not for everybody. And I think that helps also to figure it out because we have our own lane. Mm-hmm. So I think, people tend to come to us who want to come there, so I think there's we're preset to accommodate folks who are part of our tribe, honestly.
Yeah. And you mentioned at the very beginning that race is still a major issue here.
Yeah.
And I know you ran for mayor a while ago, if I'm not mistaken. And so let's just pretend that you're running for office again here, knowing that race is still one of the biggest challenges that we're having in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
How would we fix it?
Well, I don't know if you could fix it. I think what you need to do is not ignore it. I think that's what happens sometimes is a lot of times people think that it's mostly non-blacks or brown people think that if you ignore race, it will just go away over time. That over generations, people will kind of get over that. Oh, that never happens. People only move on when they're heard. when they feel like they've been acknowledged, when their suffering, pain, historical trauma, whatever it is that they're dealing with, has been acknowledged. And unless that happens, trust is missing. Moving on is definitely missing. And I don't think we can actually advance as a society in a healthy way unless we deal with it. So dealing with race is a big deal. A lot of, we started doing these conversations about race from day one, basically from 2005, way before Black Lives Matter and all the other stuff became a cool thing to do. I'm always like walking around seeing these corporate places saying Black Lives Matter, and I always, think, oh, that's so funny, like suddenly they discovered that Black Lives Matter, um, and and I see the same thing happening on issues of Palestine. It's not the coolest thing to do right now, but in time it will be. People will have Palestinian Lives Matter on their front page one day. I mean, I don't know if you listened to SNL over the weekend, but that was a groundbreaking moment, for somebody to say "Free Palestine" on SNL. That's not shouting from the audience or streaking through the stage. Actually, the host of the show saying "Free Palestine" and having the audience applaud him for a good a few seconds. Definitely, it was the largest applause of anything that he said that night. To me, that's an immense change. We're seeing that change happening, and in time, I think that change will take place. So, I think the authenticity is important, and I don't want to lose that.
And I remember, if I remember correctly, you had a day without immigrants where all of your locations closed. Is that correct?
Yeah. We closed all of our locations that day, and
I mean, just for anybody listening to that doesn't happen in business, where especially in the restaurant business, where you close all the locations.
It's a lot of revenue lost. We paid our staff.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. But it was necessary. The hatred that was coming toward immigrants, and people don't realize that immigrants run this country in so many ways. We saw it when COVID happened. Most of the people that were delivering the food and delivering the products that people wanted and needed during that time were probably immigrants, brown and black people also. So oftentimes, I think we tend to, I think it's interesting. People want to have all these luxuries in their life. That's why they work hard. That's why they want to make money. The people that provide luxuries are usually brown and black people. And so the idea of denigrating them or putting them down is not a useful exercise to do. So I think COVID really has taught us a lot and helped to kind of realign the system a little bit and get people to focus on what matters and the people that matter. And I don't think there's any turning back from that. We've seen a change. But people appreciate it. Used to be, it's funny, it used to be, I think even pre-COVID, not even way before that. I think just before COVID, it used to be when you go to tip, you tipped according to quality of service. Now people just tip.
Right.
Because they know that person needs to make a living. Yes, they may not be great at it, but they still have to pay for their rent and children or whatever. And so people tip now, I think partly out of shame, because they've been shamed into not when they don't tip correctly, and partly out of really social responsibility. They feel like, I know that person is not making as much as I am, and I want to be able to share in my wealth or my benefits. So I think COVID changed that. I think that came about from COVID.
Yeah. So for Palestinian Americans or Palestinians in the diaspora, what advice would you give them right now on how best to stand up for their rights and stand up in order to create eventually, I hope, a free Palestine.
Well, I think being visible is really important. I think that what I find interesting is now you go to these rallies and you see these white-looking people, and they end up to be Palestinian. Is like it's kind of cool, right? That all of a sudden, like, oh, you're Palestinian. That's so cool. Like I was this morning. I was at a demonstration because not a day goes by that I'm not demonstrating these days. Fortunately. But today was the annual Easter egg roll in the White House, and I had no idea this was such a big deal. Literally thousands of people show up. I mean, I'm saying thousands. And I asked the guard at the door, I said, when does this end? And he said, 6 p.m. tonight. The line starts, let's say, at 8 in the morning and doesn't end till 6 p.m. And it's constant. It's like a stream. And you get like, everybody has a ticket and they get like a time stamp. And so they come in, let's say group 1 comes in at, 8:30 to 9:30. Group 2, 9:30 to 10:30. Group 3, blah, blah, blah. And so on. And so they hold back the groups until one group goes through and they go out the other side. And then the next group goes in so that everybody gets a chance to get in. And it's like huge. And I'm standing in the front and I'm standing at where the line enters. I'm like within, 3 feet from the people entering. And I'm not shouting, but telling them, please think of the children in Gaza. Please think of the children in Gaza, because everyone had children. That's what this is about. Please think of the children in Gaza. Please think of the children in Gaza. And I repeated that 110,000 times, I think, this morning. My voice is hoarse, as you can probably hear. And it's because I was shouting the entire time, please think of the children in Gaza. And it was interesting because I then started playing the role of the National Park Service folks, because people were coming in asking where the bathroom is to the National Park guy, and he pointed them a direction, or asked where the volunteer tent is. He put them to another direction. So I learned where the directions are. So I said, people come in, they're standing. I said, what are you waiting for? And they say, oh, I'm looking to volunteer. I said, the tent is over there. Go right there. So they go in. So I started playing National Park Service person, saying, please have your tickets ready, and please think of the kids in Gaza. Please have your tickets ready, and please think of the kids in Gaza, over and over again. So people started thinking maybe I work for the MPS, but it was a interesting thing when you create the visibility, and when you do it with respect. People were uncomfortable because they're going in kind of, oblivious to, or at least appearing to be oblivious to what's going on in the world, but they're not. Right. People know what's happening. They know, and with the exception of one person who like pushed back, many people either ignored what I was saying because they wanted to just like be that way, or they said, they would like whisper a thumbs up or a thank you, which is sad that they have to whisper it, but still. So when the park guy comes to me and says, you need to really move back, or you do this, I said, listen, you should like thank me. I am upholding your democracy. I'm doing your dirty work for you. All right. While you're standing there earning money, I'm standing here, my own time, upholding your democracy. What are you doing today to uphold democracy? So, it's interesting. Immigrants and Black people and people that are oftentimes marginalized are the ones that take democracy more seriously. The rest of the people are pretty happy with fascism, it seems, because they don't think it affects them, until they find some rule that, if you have a mustache, you get to be, the bad guy,
Yeah.
But that doesn't come, and people don't think it's going to come till it does.
Yeah. So just a few more questions, if that's okay. If you could tell your younger self one thing, what would it be?
do more yoga. Like seriously.
Yeah, I'll take it.
I mean, really, do more stretching, more yoga. It makes life much easier, much more pleasant. As you get older, cricks start to happen. You get like pains and things. And if you stretch on any regular basis, you'll do much, much better and later in life. So I would say that. I would say quit when you think it's the right time to quit for something. Don't keep going down a rabbit hole thinking that you're going to finally get there. If you feel like something isn't quite making you joyful, it's probably not for you, and maybe it's time to change. The other thing is, I think do some extreme things. Do things that make you really uncomfortable.
Like a podcast.
Well, I think that's a cop out. I think something much more uncomfortable, something that makes you really kind of get out of your comfort zone completely. You seem very comfortable in your space, okay? And I don't want to but anyway, what I'm saying is do something extreme physically or mentally. Physically also is really important, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is you expand your ability in what you think you cannot do, which I think is really important, sort of breaking boundaries for yourself. And I think the other thing, which is interesting, I don't know, I like extreme hiking. I did Everest Base Camp a few years ago. I'm going back again this May to do it with my son. And one of the things that happens during that period of time is there's a book called Into Thin Air by John Krakauer, who is one of the top hikers in the world. He's also a writer. He writes really well. And he wrote something called Into Thin Air. It was about his experience going to Everest and summiting Everest and back. Almost died. Several people on his expedition actually died, but he survived, came back to tell the story. And people asked him, why do you do that? Like, why do you put yourself through this? He says, interesting thing, because you really don't know why you do it. There's a calling, right? And you just do it. But what happens when you do it is that you stretch your emotional spectrum when you do that. When you go into a space that is so painful and almost feeling like, oh my God, I don't know why I put myself through this. This could be the end of me. And then you come out and you say, wow, I did that. Yeah. Your emotional spectrum gets much wider. Your joy becomes more joyful. And so I think it's like putting on these glasses that make you see the world much clearer when you do these extreme things. So I highly recommend that.
That's amazing. So what do you want your legacy to be? 50 years from now, 60 years from now?
I think I asked Andrea Davis that, and she says, you're saying I'm old, is what you're saying.
I said 50 years from now.
Nobody asks a 30-year-old, what do you think your legacy will be? But anyway, what my I don't know. I hope I think the best you can wish for is that once you leave this realm, that somehow people will remember you the same way that they would while you were here. Instead of like saying, did you know he was really like that? Not like he appeared to be, So I would want to stay authentic to who I am and what I stand for. That's probably the best we can ask for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got to tell you, I know you have a book that you're working on. I'm so excited for it. I was going to actually WhatsApp you the other day, and because obviously we were doing research about you, and I was like, I can't wait to read his book. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I mean, a lot of what we talked about today is going to be in the book. It's I use humor in a way because I think I'm funny, and I want to be able to. I did stand-up comedy not long ago. God, that was really fun to do. But the book really takes you from the beginning of arriving to the United States until the opening of Busboys and Poets. And, it's of course a very condensed version of all that. It's not like, War and Peace, it's not a very long book. Because I think people get bored reading like a lot of details. But it talks about it's really kind of like a restaurant book a little bit. So it's got a lot of restaurant stuff in it. Kind of like one of my biggest what do you call them? Not mentors, but people I look up to was Anthony Bourdain, whom I just adored and loved his work and his writing and all this. His writing is so sharp. Kitchen Confidential was like one of the best reads. It was so much fun to read, and so it was that was kind of, that's my style also, in a way. It's like telling inside stories about the business, inside stories about the rest. So it's a little bit of a business book, honestly, in a indirect way. So I'm hoping that will be how it will be perceived as a business book, but kind of just a different type of business book.
Just like Busboys and Poets as a restaurant.
I think so.
Yeah. So who would you want to play you in the movie coming out of that book?
Really, it's so funny. I just signed the book contract, and in it there's like film rights, and I'm thinking like, what? I don't know how you can make a movie out of it that's going to be like interesting enough for people to kind of watch it. I can see, but I can see. I mean, restaurants are very interesting places, right? They attract interesting characters. There's always some odd character who works in the restaurant. There's odd characters that show up all the time. So I think somebody has the potential to do something within the restaurant. I don't think it'll be out of my book, but I think I always enjoy restaurant shows. I don't know if you watched The Bear.
My wife does.
Yeah. It's I'm not crazy about The Bear, I have to admit, but it's having stories about restaurants and the belly of a restaurant, because the thing about restaurants, everybody knows a restaurant. Everybody goes to restaurants. It's very familiar to us, right. So I think it makes it easy to have an affinity for that type of place, and that kind of setting.
Yeah. Well, my daughters think I look like you when I was doing research. So if there's, thank you. But if there's any room for me to be you in the movie somehow,
I would be delighted.
Yeah. So Andy, I got to tell you, you're a huge inspiration. As somebody that has dealt with a high level of anxiety and depression as well throughout my life, and you speaking about the speech impediment and just doing it, just going out and doing it and working at it and not giving up. I really do appreciate it. And I really want to keep saying this to you. The fact that you gave us a platform at your restaurant to talk about Palestine is so powerful. And we will forever be indebted to you for that.
Oh, I absolutely love it. I wouldn't do it any other way.
Thank you, Andy. Have a great one.
Thank you. Take care.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. Listen, stay tuned, cause it's time for Sumúd.